She told herself she was waiting for the right time, to speak, to leave, to live. But time was never waiting for her. The perfect moment never comes. Only lost ones do. Elena Carter was the kind of woman everyone described as gentle. Soft voice, kind smile, patient heart. But beneath that calm, something in her was quietly breaking. She was 36 when she first started saying, maybe next year. Maybe next year she'd leave. Maybe next year she'd travel. Maybe next year she'd finally start painting again. She lived in a small house on the edge of town with a man who once made her laugh, but now made her small. Her husband, Michael, was not cruel in the way stories often paint villains. He was polite to guests, charming to neighbors, and careful with words. But behind closed doors, his kindness came with conditions, silence, control, and the quiet erosion of who Elena used to be. She used to paint every weekend. Now her brushes sat in a jar of cloudy water, untouched for years. Every morning she'd walk past that small easel in the corner, glance at it for a second, and whisper, "One day." She said it so often it started to sound like a prayer. One day, when things are better. One day, when he's calmer. One day, when I'm stronger. But life doesn't pause for people who wait. It simply keeps moving, and Elena, unknowingly, was fading into the background of her own story. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived from the city's art council, an invitation to apply for an artist's residency program. It was the kind of chance she'd dreamed of in her 20s, when the world still felt wide and waiting. She sat at the kitchen table, filling in the form. Halfway through, Michael walked in. He picked up the paper, read it once, and smirked. An artist residency? At your age? You really think anyone's waiting to see your little paintings? He laughed, kissed her on the forehead, and walked away. She didn't reply. She simply folded the application neatly and tucked it in the drawer beside the bills. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain against the window felt heavier than usual. She opened her phone and looked at her old photos, the ones from years ago, with her paint-stained hands and unfiltered laughter. She stared at her younger self and whispered, "Where did you go?" But she didn't cry. She just turned off the phone and promised herself that she'd try again later. Later, the word that has stolen more dreams than failure ever did. Weeks passed. Then months. Routine returned like a fog. At work, her students adored her. She was the art teacher who never raised her voice, the one who stayed after class to encourage the quiet kids. But none of them knew that when she spoke to them about courage and creativity, she was really talking to herself. One morning, a little girl named Sophie left a drawing on her desk. It was a sketch of Elena holding a paintbrush, smiling. Below it were the words, "You look happy when you talk about painting." That sentence cut deeper than any insult ever could. She held that paper all day. Something inside her, long dormant, flickered again. That night, after Michael fell asleep, she uncovered her old easel. The canvas was yellowed, the brushes stiff, but she didn't care. She painted until sunrise. Clumsy strokes, uneven colors, raw emotion. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The next day, she opened her laptop and filled out the residency form again. This time, she pressed submit. And for a moment, everything felt possible. For the first time in years, she stopped waiting. But life, as always, tests the moment you try to rise. That evening, Michael found the confirmation email. He was furious. "How could you do this without telling me?" he shouted. She stood silent, trembling, paint still on her fingers. He shouted again, louder this time. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built." And she said softly, "Maybe everything we've built is what's breaking me." He didn't understand. He never would. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door. Elena sat there, suitcase open, hands shaking. For hours she sat on the edge of the bed, deciding. When he came back later that night, his anger had melted into tears. He begged her not to go. He promised to change. He said, "I just don't want to lose you." And that was the moment she broke, not from his words, but from her own heart's weakness. Because she still loved him. Because she was still afraid. Because the voice of guilt was louder than the whisper of freedom. So she stayed. She unpacked the suitcase, closed the laptop, and whispered once more, maybe next year. Years passed again. Time softened the edges of everything, even her dreams. Michael grew quieter with age. She grew smaller with compromise. At 52, she still taught art at the same school. Her students still adored her. One afternoon, she saw a social media post from that same little girl, Sophie, now a grown woman. She was standing in front of a bright art gallery wall, smiling, holding a brush. The caption read, "Grateful to my first art teacher for believing in me." Elena smiled when she saw it, proud, but also aching, because she realized her student had lived the dream she kept postponing. That night, she sat in her quiet house, surrounded by unfinished canvases. The silence was thick. She picked up a brush again. This time, she didn't plan or perfect, she just painted. The piece was simple, a woman standing in a doorway, sunlight pouring in, but her feet still planted in shadow. She titled it The Perfect Moment. When she finished, she stood there for a long time, staring at it. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. And in that sound, she heard the truth she had avoided her whole life. The perfect moment doesn't exist. All she ever had were imperfect ones, moments that could have been enough if she'd just begun. She smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. Then she turned off the light, whispering to the dark, "I waited too long, didn't I?"